Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am back, continuing on with Loners, Drifters, and Outsiders month. Hope you have enjoyed what I started the year off with by doing Taxi Driver. That is a very interesting and deep and wild and kind of sort of is timely movie, especially dealing with mental health and like being a product of your environment in certain cases, or how things can boil to a tipping point, and you know calamity ensues, basically, right? But for this episode, as you listen to the trailer, I am going to be talking about The Place Beyond the Pines and how this kind of fits perfectly after Taxi Driver. So with Taxi Driver, you're dealing with a loner and some outsiders. But I feel like with this movie, you are dealing with loners, you're dealing with some drifters, and also some outsiders. And I explain that a little bit more as I kind of go through talking about this movie. One thing about this movie is that the way you get three different stories told from three different points of views across generations. And of course, I mean, the biggest thing is that is essentially it's essentially the sins of the father. Basically, is what this movie is basically about. And so, if you've never seen The Place Beyond the Pines, I suggest that you stop the podcast right here, go watch it, come back, and then listen to me talk about it, because I am going to spoil the hell out of this movie. As far as talking about, I mean, it is a older film and everything, so it's not recent, and everything. Even though a few of the main actors relatively still look the same, and everything like that. But yeah, so let's get into talking about this movie. Now, I actually saw this movie at the movie theater when it came out, and everything. I remember when I went to see it because it was kind of a hassle. I almost was late to the theater to see it, and I ended up getting stuck behind somebody in the line who was ordering multiple screenings of what movie was that? I can't remember what movie it was, but it was like a big blockbuster type movie, and they was ordering all these tickets for multiple screenings of it. And I'm like, will you get the hell out of the way so I can just get my one ticket for this freaking movie? And everything. But I remember watching the movie and I was touched by it. In the sense of, it was not what I was expecting in a good way, because the preview would have you think that it's pretty much a back and forth between Ryan Gosling's character Luke and Bradley Cooper's character of Avery. And that's not what you really get here. You get more of like small, isolated incident. Well, I wouldn't say incidents, but just small, isolated points in times in these people's lives that interconnect, basically, is what you get. At least that's what my takeaway from the movie is, to a degree. And it's a movie that, you like I say, if you go into the movie blind, like, because the previews doesn't really do the movie justice, in the sense of, you know exactly what you're getting. All you know is that Ryan Gosling's character of Luke is basically this guy who, he meets a woman and they end up having a child, and he wants to be a part of that child's life, so he starts robbing banks because he needs money. And you know that Bradley Cooper's character is a police officer who eventually moves up the ranks. In a sense, that's kind of what you surface level get from it. But like I said, it's a lot more than that. And I thought it was a bold choice, or ambitious choice, really, to tell this story like multi-generational. Because like I said, it starts off, they don't specifically say what year it is, but I want to say it's early 90s is where the movie begins, because we fast forward 15 years later, so it would have to be like the around the time that the movie takes place. So it has to be like early mid 90s is when the movie begins, basically, when you're following Luke and Avery at least. And then we do that 15-year jump and everything. I would say that this movie, because I look at it kind of differently. Like, the movie came out in the mid 2000s, and me being in my mid 20s at the time, I looked at it one way. Now, years later, and as a near 40-year-old, as of this recording, and everything, I look at the movie a little different. And I mean, that's one thing I like about movies, especially movies that deal with real life, situations or implications or whatever. You view them differently when you're younger than when you're older, and you should, because your mindset changes, your worldview, your perspective of a lot of things. You've lived a little bit more life and been through a couple of things, so you might see things a little differently than before you went through certain things that you've had to deal with and everything. But I would say that this is a movie I feel like that grows on people, especially if you're someone who might have, sins of the father type situations or whatever. You might look at this movie a lot differently than someone who might not, or you might be able to relate to, the boogeyman father figure who, isn't around but looms over everything. Because that's kind of what Ryan Gosling does. His character, he looms over this movie. Because if you go into this movie expecting to see a lot of Ryan Gosling, after that first act, you're sadly disappointed. You don't see him anymore after that, because he gets killed, and everything, which is a shocking thing, because I don't think anyone, when you for the first time viewing this movie, you're like, oh my God, he's out of the movie. He's out the paint, basically, and everything. But speaking of Ryan Gosling as Luke Glanton, he's our drifter, basically. I one thing I do like about how he's framed in this movie, like he is like an outlaw. They even make reference that Luke is like an outlaw, and from the opening shot of him in his trailer, playing with the butterfly knife and getting ready, and as he's walking through the carnival, and like I say, the way he's framed and everything, it gives him this mysterious drifter type, persona, basically. But he doesn't say a lot, but you can tell like there's something deep down inside that's like boiling over, which he has a few roles like this. Place Beyond the Pines is one of them. Drive is one of them. Only God Forgives, which is a movie I think I'd never review on this podcast, but I feel like they're like different sides of the same person, in a sense. Not saying that they are the same person, even though I do have this kind of theory that the character that he plays in Drive is the same character from Only God Forgives, but that's just me with that. But at the same time, he's very reserved, but you can see it in him. Like at any given moment, he can just crash out, basically, and everything. And then too, the whole thing of when him and Ramona get together, it's like, okay, this is like the fire we make. Like they meet and they instantly hit it off and they become a thing, and they get together, they hook up and everything. And because he's a part of the carnival and everything, he leaves. But then when he comes back, next thing you know, it's like, he shows up at her house and it's like, who's that guy? And she's holding the baby, his little Jason and everything. And when he realized like, oh, he's a dad and all this, is like, it kind of shakes him to a degree, but it makes him want to try to at least attempt to be a part of his child's life, even though he goes about it in the wrong way in a few cases, primarily deciding to rob banks because he needs money, because he wants to buy for his kid and everything like that. And then the fact too that Ramona has moved on and she's in a relationship with a black guy played by Mahershala Ali, and everything. I think that kind of shakes him to a degree of like, well, he want them to be a family. It's just he doesn't know how to be, be the man that he wants to be. That's kind of what I get from him in a way. He wants to be better than what he is, but he know who he really is, and it's like an internal struggle for him. And so of course he goes down this destructive road of where he just want to ride his bike. He wants to ride his bike and rob banks basically, and that's what he ends up doing. And one thing about it too is like the way they show him when he's like the scenes of him riding on his motorcycle is like he just has that freedom and he's escaping, because you don't know where he comes from. You don't really get a backstory of him, but you just know he's lived a rough life. You know this. You just his demeanor, everything about him. He's lived a rough life, but you don't know too much about him. And I think that's what kind of adds a lot to the character and what kind of makes you want more out of that character, to a degree. And his story is a tragic story, because you meet him, like I say, he is in love with Ramona. It just, he can't be the man he wants to be with her. And the fact that he rides past the house and he sees, he looks up in the window, he sees her with, baby Jason and Mahershala Ali's character. I think his name is Kofi. Like them being a family and everything. And it's like, that's what he wants, but he can't be that. And you can tell like it hurts him and everything. And then he starts to, okay, go from robbing one bank. Oh, I want to do two in one day. And, his friend Robbie, no, yeah, I think it's Robbie, played by Ben Mendelsohn. He tells him, and which I feel like is like the line of the movie, is like, and you ride like lightning, you're gonna crash like thunder. And it's like Luke, he's just like, this is his way of acting out in a way to where he ends up basically, he's doing the one bank job, but then it's like the one thing of like, okay, well, when something can go wrong, it does go wrong. And when he's doing that one job and when he's leaving, he goes to start the motorcycle and it's like it's having a hard time starting. So then the cops is right on him. He loses the one cop. But then that's where we are introduced to young Avery, played by Bradley Cooper, who tracks him down, where he ends up crashing the motorcycle and he ends up running into these people's house and barricades himself upstairs in the bedroom. And Avery comes searching because he's doing his job basically. And this scene is always very important to me in the movie, of where Luke, he calls Ramona and he's telling her like, don't ever tell him about me. Basically, he's embarrassed. Like, basically saying like he couldn't be the man that he wanted to be. He doesn't want his son to even know he exists. And while he's sitting there on the phone, Avery comes up. He bursts through the door, and Avery shoots him. And as he's falling out the window, he gets off a shot and shoots Avery in the leg, but he falls to his death. And Avery is deemed a hero, but it feels like the Luke character is like the whole thing that kind of ties everything together, because his story is tragic. The ending of his story is the beginning of, and I always say that this is like the foundation of the Avery Cross character. But I'll talk about a little bit more about that a little later, as I want to talk a little bit more about the fact that how, even though this film it has 3 acts, but it's treated like short stories in a way. And the fact that you have different protagonists in each, like the first half of the movie, like the first act of the movie is Luke Ganton. He is the protagonist of the first part of the movie. And then once they because the only scene that they have together is that scene in the bedroom where they have the little shootout basically. And then we transition to Avery now, who's deemed as, he's the hero. He's, the hero cop and all this type of stuff. And, he was injured in the line of duty and all this things and that. I thought it was an interesting choice of how they kind of shift focus, because it goes from being like this outlaw type of drifter to now you have this outsider, because that's what Avery is. Avery is an outsider. He's not like them. He's not like the rest of the cops who are pretty much dirty cops and everything. And I thought it was very interesting that they decided to do that. And then at the end you have like the loners basically, which is Jason. Jason is the loner. And I wouldn't say that AJ is a loner. He's like an outsider to a degree also, because he's not in the loop with what his dad is doing, but he wants to be a part of it so much. He wants his dad's attention, approval so bad and everything. But I thought it was interesting like how they did this movie and kind of give you a little bit of each one of these stories and like say the time periods in these people's lives, the way it's done, and how time kind of plays an important role, because like I say, it's you go from the early 90s basically to the early mid 2000s and everything, and you can kind of see like the little slight changes. And I would say the one character that like you can tell like the weight of everything is on them is the Ava Mendes character. Like she goes through it. Like when we first introduced her, she's young, she's vibrant and everything, but then after what happens with Luke and everything, you see like, yeah, she's kind of beaten down. And then when you see her in the third act, it's like, yeah, she's aged. She's had a rough 15 years basically, and everything. But let's talk about the Avery Cross character, Bradley Cooper character, who like I say, he is the hero. He's the super cop. Well, not super cop, but he's the hero cop, who brings down Luke and everything. And he is a little bit more different than what Luke is. It's like they're different sides, because whereas Luke was the drifter, Avery is the outsider. And he knows what he did was basically wrong, because he did not follow what the quote unquote police procedure when he breaks through the door, because he shoots first. Not real. Yeah. Even though, Luke has the gun, he's not in a confrontational way, because he's sitting there on the phone and he's sitting in the window. So he just bursts in and just shoots. And he, like I say, in a way, he does the wrong thing. But of course he's deemed as the hero, and he does feel some type of way about it, because he wants to be looked at as the good guy, but deep down he knows he's not really the good guy. He's not the hero. It's almost like imposter syndrome in a way. And then with his whole story of where, his friends, the other cops or whatever, led by Ray Liotta, who, I mean, anytime Ray Liotta shows up in the movie post Goodfellas, it's like maybe a handful of times where he's like a good guy. I would probably say Karina and maybe Smoking Aces, but everything after that, Ray Liotta is like a no good in a movie. For the most, I like I say, those are the only two movies I can think of where Ray Liotta is like a good guy in those movies. I don't know. Y'all let me know what movies after Goodfellas, not Karina, and not Smoking Aces, where Ray Liotta plays a good guy character. Y'all let me know, because I can't think of any that I've seen with him and everything. But when he shows up and everything, and you can tell these cops are like, no, it's almost like Josh Brolin in American Gangster, when him and his goons first walk in, like, yeah, they cops, but they ain't no damn good. That's basically what Ray Liotta is in this movie. And we get this whole thing of basically like police corruption and, and all this type of stuff dealing with, and Avery having his high moral superiority complex that he has. He feels, okay, I have to do the right thing, but I want to do the right thing, but also I want to leverage everything to bolster my career, because when everything goes down, he uses it to his advantage, so he can basically become, move up and become a district attorney. And then in the third act, we see that he is running for attorney general. So like I say, the foundation of his career is built off of lies, basically. And it all starts with him shooting Luke Gann, and everything, even though he's, like I say, he's looked as a hero, but he's not really a hero. And you have to watch the movie to really understand it. I mean, I can explain it, but you have to see the scene. It's like he shoots first. He doesn't say put your hands up or anything. Like, he just bursts into the room and lets off a shot and everything. But yeah, he basically builds his career off of lies and everything like that. And we get this whole thing with him later, which I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the third act of talking about the movie. But his character is one of those characters, like, okay, he's a good guy, but he does bad things also. Yes, he's not like Serpico or anything. I would say he's almost like a Richie Roberts type, where, okay, because he does this one good thing, it doesn't erase away all the bad things that he's done. And I would put it like that. It's like he lives in a more of a gray area. He's a good guy who does kind of swarmy things in order to get what he wants and everything. And that's kind of how he's looked at. He's not a hero character. I don't think you look at the Avery Cross character as a good guy. Yes, he does good things. Yes, he brought down the police corruption in his own department, but is he really a good guy? And I think that's one thing that kind of leaves viewers, if you watch the movie, it leaves you kind of thinking about that character a little bit, because Luke is who he is. Avery is like a wolf in sheep's clothing in a way, whereas Luke is a wolf. He's a wolf. Avery is a little bit more deceptive with his, and it makes you wonder, like, hey, who would you trust more? Would you trust Luke or would you trust Avery more? So, yeah. So, all right. So, a few things about this movie. Like I say, as I mentioned, it is essentially the whole thing about sins of the father. And you have like this inherent trauma and, loss of identity. Like I say, we don't know about Luke, but we know he has some type of trauma, and it does get passed down virtually to his son Jason, as we see later on. And you have people trying to find their own identity. Avery's trying to find exactly what type of man he really is. AJ doesn't know what type of man he wants to be, but he's seeking his father's approval so bad. And me personally, I don't have a problem with the whole sins of the father being the main overarching theme of the movie. Once I kind of realized that's what the movie was, the first time I saw it, I enjoyed that aspect of it, because it is one of those generational trauma type things. This movie is a generational trauma movie, if you really boil it down to that. And then when we get to the third act and how the two sons, Jason and AJ, they basically carry the emotional weight of what their father's past are in a way. Jason doesn't really know where he comes from, but he finds out where he comes from. And one of the things I do enjoy about the movie, in the sense too, of when Jason goes, because he starts asking questions, and the dinner scene where he's sitting around with his mother and Kofi, who is his father, basically, and his sister, and everything. And then he just bursts out and he says, "Why you never tell me about my dad?" And the look that Ramona gives him, like, what? But that's the look that Eva Mendes gives him. She's like, huh? Who? Basically, that's like, I mean, I'm just kind of making a joke out of it, but that's kind of how she's looking. She just had this stone look on her face, but I'm pretty sure in her head, she's like, huh? Who you talking about? Your dad's right there. Like, I don't know what you mean. But, and it gets her so emotional, because even though they did not, and I'm talking about Ramona and Luke, even though they didn't have a long relationship, but basically he was the love of her life. And like they always say, if you can't love the one you want, then love the one you're with. And basically Kofi had no problem being the second, like the second option, basically, and everything. And he was cool with that. Like she's always carrying this flame, this torch for this dead man, basically. Um, but when he goes searching and he finds Robbie, and Robbie kind of gives him the backstory a little bit about his dad, he's like, don't start there. And it's showing basically that, you know, he was killed by Avery and all this type of stuff. He's like, don't start there. He's like, I'm gonna show you the good stuff about your dad. Like, don't start with the bad. Like, let me show you the good. And then he find like the little sunglasses that Luke used to have. And what I liked about that is that after the whole exchange between Robbie and Jason, when we see Jason after, he's framed in the same sense of how Luke is framed, from behind, following him. It's like he's starting to kind of carry and walk similar to his dad. And I like that, of like, now he's starting to have some sense of where he came from, basically. Good or bad, but at least he knows where he came from at this point. And it's always good to know where you come from and everything, because like they say, if you don't know where you came from, how you know where you're going, type of thing. And then like how, like the last part, it was just interesting. Avery kills Luke, but then the kids, Jason and AJ, they become somewhat frenemies in a way, and they bond because of, you know, Oxy, basically, and, you know, and things like that. And Jason is he's a loner, but he wants to kind of fit in and be a part of the in crowd, whereas AJ is a part of the in crowd, but he is an outsider all at the same time. And what I find interesting is when they get arrested after going to buy some Oxy and everything. And when Avery, of course, pulls up, because, you know, he's big time. He's running for attorney general. So, of course, he's big time and all this stuff. He comes in, he's like, can we cut off the microphone? You know, can we cut the feed off in this room? He goes in and he tells AJ, because when he finds out who Jason is and everything, he doesn't go say anything to Jason. He goes to AJ and tells him, leave that boy alone. But the way he attacks him, basically like, look, leave that boy alone. I don't care what you got going on. Leave that boy alone. And it's like, that kind of screws with AJ, because it's like, well, who the hell is he that he's so important that you come in and you're not even worried? You're not worried about me. You're basically chastising me about leaving this kid alone. So what makes him so freaking special? Which ruins their quote unquote friendship in a sense, because they get into it at the house party that AJ is having, because this is where Jason finds out that Avery is his dad, because he's hooking up with his girl, and as they're on the stairwell and everything, he looks at the picture and he down there like he sees a ghost when he sees Avery in the same picture, copy in his uniform, the same picture he saw in the newspaper of where he killed Luke and everything. So of course he gets into it with AJ, and AJ end up beating the hell out of him, end up putting him in the hospital. And because of that, when he gets out the hospital, he ends up going to get a gun, and he goes back to AJ's house. At first, I mean, the first time I saw it, I thought like, oh, you're going to kill the kid, which would have been kind of almost, I won't say Shakespearean, but it would have been something similar to that vein of where, what if Jason would have killed AJ, in the sense, the fact that Avery killed Luke, but they didn't go that route. But it kind of makes, for a split second, you kind of think that might happen, but he doesn't. He just basically pistol whips him, and then as Avery is coming home, he meets him on the stairs and tells him to shut up and turn around. We're going to get your car. We're going to drive. And he takes Avery out to the place beyond the pines, literally. and holds him at gunpoint. And Avery basically, the emotional weight that he's been carrying all these years, because he know who Jason is, and he know that he did kill his dad wrongfully. In a sense, it wasn't justified the way he killed him, and in a way, it's almost like they don't specifically say it outright, but it's always felt like Avery has kind of always kept an eye somewhat on Jason to a degree, and everything, and he didn't want the kid to suffer anymore, so he just break down. He has his breakdown moment, and Jason doesn't kill him. He just leaves him out there in the woods, and it's like that weight for him is finally lifted, and AJ ends up leaving or whatever. And I like how the movie ends in a way of where you get somewhat closure. Like, we don't necessarily get the actual interaction of where AJ and Avery, reconcile, but you get a sense like, okay, their relationship is going to be a lot better moving forward because now they have this shared trauma together. Because Avery does become the attorney general of New York and everything, and Jason, he pretty much leaves, but he sends his mother a letter, and she opens it up, and it's the picture that her, Luke, and baby Jason took when he was an infant. And I always like that picture because Lucas has them on both sides, but he has his left hand over Ramona's face, and she's smiling, but you can't see her face. And Jason pretty much says his goodbyes. Like, basically he's going to find himself, in a sense, as he leaves. And then we get the last scene where he pretty much goes to this guy who's selling this motorcycle, and he pays him. And the guy, like, when he first getting on it, the man asks him, like, have you ever ridden one of these before? And he starts it up and he just drives off. And it's almost like, hell, he was born to ride a motorcycle. And the last shot of him just riding down the open road, because he's going out west, probably going to California or something. But he just leaves so he can basically find who he is. Now he's not so much a loner anymore, but he's more of a drifter at this point. He kind of changes from being a loner to a drifter. And it makes you wonder again, how did Luke end up like with the carnival, with circus basically, and everything? Like, how did he end up there, and could Jason potentially do the same type of thing? So let's talk about performance wise. I mean, Ryan Gosling, I think this is one of his better performances that I've seen him in, and I've seen him in quite a few movies, but I think this is one of his best performances. And the fact that it's not a big character for him, because like I said, he's only in the first part of the movie, but the way the character looms over the movie lets you know he did do a good enough job where he has an impact over the overarching of the movie, and how most of his performance is internal. Like, he does a lot with his eyes and just his body language of everything. He doesn't have to say a lot, and everything. And I thought he did a really good job here. And I would say this is like the movie where I kind of started paying attention more to Ryan Gosling as a actor, and everything. Of course, I had seen him in other things like Remember the Titans and a couple other things at that point, but I didn't really like, oh, Ryan Gosling, oh, he's such a great actor. No, but from this movie on is where I started looking at him in a very different light as a performer, and everything. Bradley Cooper, I think, even though he has more screen time than Ryan, his character, I think his performance is very interesting, because even though he is like the main protagonist of the second act, and he of course is a supporting of the third act, it's a very nuanced, I think, quiet performance that he gives. He doesn't like gets completely out of pocket, out of character and everything. But I think this is also one of those movies where you start to look at Bradley Cooper as more, you can take him more seriously, because up until this point he was like, oh, that's the Hangover guy, to a degree. But once he started doing more stuff like this, and and then Silver Lining Playbook and things like that, you start looking at, oh, okay, we can look at him as being more than just the Hangover guy, and everything. But I do like his performance too, not as much as I like Ryan's performance, but I do like Bradley. I think this would be considered one of Bradley's better performances in a movie, for me at least. And then, I mean, the supporting characters that we get here, I think Eva Mendes is very good in this movie. Of course, she slowly backed away from acting and everything, because this is around the time where her and Ryan Gosling get together. I knew I was going to mess up with Ryan Reynolds at some point, call him Ryan Gosling, Ryan Reynolds, but this is like one of those movies where you get to see more from Eva Mendes as a actress, and everything, and she like I say, she has a lot of weight to carry in this movie too. And like I say, you have Mahershala Ali, even though his character is not big, but he plays a somewhat important role in the whole family dynamic of things. Ray Liotta, like I say, playing a no good dirty cop. I mean, he was great playing these type of characters for whatever reason. And then like I say, you have other performance that's in this movie that really make the movie feel like it could be something that it could be almost like a documentary. Like, you kind of see somebody in each of these characters that I think you would know. Hell, Rose Byrne showing up as Avery's wife, Harrison Yulin as Avery's dad, like very good character actors who show up in this movie. Ben Mendenhall, as Robbie, the friend or whatever that helps with the robberies and stuff like that. All very good standout supporting performances. I think they help make the movie even better because of their performances also, and everything. So let's talk about how the movie's about fathers that don't know how to be fathers, because that's what we get here. Both Luke and Avery don't know how to be fathers, really, in different ways. One is, okay, I'm trying so hard to be a father, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing to be a father. The other one, yeah, I'm a father, but my career is more important, so I'm basically neglecting my kid to a degree. And there are a lot of movies that you have fathers that don't know how to be fathers, or they're too hard on their kids for whatever reason. But I think this movie kind of falls into that. And like I say, when you're younger watching it, it hits one way. When you become an adult, it hits a completely different way, I feel like. But yeah, this, like I say, just watching it, because, okay, I would say this from a personal aspect. I can somewhat relate to Sins of the Father to a degree. In some certain cases. Another movie that I think that kind of I relate to in that regard, not fully, but just from what I'm talking about as far as movies where fathers don't know how to be fathers, I would say Purple Rain, because Clarence William III as Prince's dad doesn't know how to be a father. I mean, that whole exchange between them in that movie where it's like, you got a girl? And he's like, yeah. And it's like, Prince is thinking, oh, we're having a father-son moment here. And it's like, you going to get married? Like, I don't know. And then when he looks up at him, like, never get married. Don't ever get married. And it's like, huh? Like, but you and mom are married. Like, wait a minute. Like, what is this? And how, the tears start running down his eyes, and he just walks out the room, and he walks into the hallway and just holds his head against the wall. And it's like, what the hell was that? Like, that's an example of a father not knowing how to be a father. He's very abusive, not only to his wife, but also to Prince in the movie and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, that's one of those type of movies. But as far as fathers not knowing how to be fathers, not knowing how to have conversations or whatever, I can relate to that to some degree. I will say that. Right. So, Yeah, but like I said, if you guys want, that's just an example of a movie I'm talking about, like of a movie where I'm talking about fathers being fathers. But I would love to know, what movies do you guys consider fathers that don't know how to be fathers? You can hit me up, of course, on the socials. If you're listening, if you're on the YouTube, comment down below movies about fathers that don't know how to be fathers, and everything like that. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also do the same, because you can comment on each individual episodes, or you can hit me up on Threads or Instagram. Let me know what you guys think about fathers not being that don't know how to be fathers. One thing about this movie too is that it is a very masculine movie. Like, Luke is a masculine dude. Like, he's a man, and everything. He's not the best man, but he is a man. Avery, again, he is a man, even though he has his, the whole thing about him being, having that moral superiority complex, but he still is a man the way he carries himself. And then you have AJ and Jason, who are trying to figure out what type of men they're going to be, because they're teenagers. They're like 16, 17. So at that point, you're trying to figure out what type of man you're going to be. Because I always tell younger people when I talk to them, I can't believe I'm saying that now, it makes me feel old, but when I do talk to like dudes like in their like either late teens, like 17, 18, or 19, 20 or whatever, and like in their early 20s or whatever, I always tell people, like, when you are in high school, especially like 16, 17, 18, you're still a kid. When you get into your 20s, like your early 20s, you're still somewhat of a kid mindset wise, even though you're an adult, but mindset wise, you're still, once you get to your mid 20s, but and I say 28, 27, 28, 29, you pretty much know what type of an adult you're going to be at that point, because now you're grown. All right. You know what type of an adult, because basically I would say those years are the years that define what type of an adult you're going to be. Now, of course, you can always have, different, things happen, change life, where your mindset does change because of whatever. But generally, what type of values, what type of moral compass you're going to have, that's where I say that 27 to 29 range is where that is truly built. I would say it's truly built at that point, because the foundation is somewhat built during your early 20s, but the whole entire building that is built during that 27, 28, 29 era of your life, and everything, for a man at least. Now, I can't speak from a woman's point of view because I'm not a woman, but all I can do is speak from a man and speak about my own experiences when it comes to that, right? So that's how I always kind of frame it, and I know that's how it was for me. It could be different for other people, but I know that's how it was for me, and everything. But this movie, it does feel like a man's movie, but it's an emotional man's movie, because it's dealing with emotions and everything, and how we react and how we act towards certain things. But I do like the fact that the movie does avoid being a macho fantasy. I mean, because at first glance, you can say, like, looking at Luke, in the trailer, flipping the butter knife, shirtless, with the tattoos and all this type of stuff. He's cool. He can be a macho dude. But we don't get that. He does have like the underlining of, vulnerability. I say, but you get it if you pay attention to Luke's body language, his eyes, how he views things. You see it from that aspect, but it's not outright told to you. You just kind of have to watch. And I think that's one thing I enjoy about the movie. It's not a movie that kind of spills everything out for you. You kind of have to pay attention to what's being shown to you, and also the little things that they try to hide, but you still pay attention to it. Like I say, it's little character moments, basically, and everything. Well, here's another thing that I want to talk about regarding the movie is Are we trapped by our parents' choice? Is it nature or nurture? Can cycles really be broken? I mean, like I say, this is a sins of the father tale. Um, do I feel like by the end of the movie that the cycle of generational trauma is broken? I think so, to a degree. Jason now has a little bit more confidence in who he is as a person. Even though he becomes a drifter, but he's not a loner anymore. He's more of a drifter. But he's finding himself. AJ probably finally like, all right, let me knock it off, because I almost was killed over some nonsense. Let me knock it off and let me get on board with my dad, and this brings us closer together and everything. So in a sense, I do feel like, the cycle is somewhat broken with these characters to a degree, or whatever. Now, I will say this. I think for anyone who watches this movie for the first time, especially now, maybe not back then, but now, maybe the pacing of the movie might not be the best, especially if you watch the trailer and then when you watch the movie. Things doesn't move really fast, even though it does move fast, but it doesn't move fast. Like, you spend time with these characters, you get to know these people, and everything, and then it jumps time. So you get these gaps, and it's like you're trying to play catch up also. The movie is somewhat a little bit long because, of course, you're trying to give each segment of the movie its time and due, but at the same time, there's a lot missing because you do a 15-year time jump. So you are trying to play catch up with certain stuff also. But me, I have no problem with the length of the movie or the pacing of the movie, because I think that's what adds more to the movie. And there are a lot of good movies out there that's like this. I will admit that the structure of the movie is was a risk. It was a gamble, but I think it works, and I think it makes the movie better. Perfect example of that I would probably compare it to is like Pulp Fiction. Watching Pulp Fiction as we know it, it works. If you ever had the chance to watch it in chronological order, it doesn't hit the same. And perfect example within that also would be the Samuel L. Jackson character. You see him like he's larger than life in Pulp Fiction as we see it, as the story is told. But if you did get to see the chronological version of it, his last line of the movie is, "I gotta go take a pee." I gotta go take a piss, really. And he's only in the first part of the movie, and it's like he's very much missing. Whereas here, he loops back around to him, and you get the whole diner thing, and it feels even larger than what it was, and everything. And for anyone asking how did I ever see the Pulp Fiction, in chronological order, well, years ago it was on YouTube before it got taken down. That is how I saw it, or whatever, and I didn't enjoy it the same as I do it as like the way Tarantino, wanted it to be, and everything. But I am glad I did get to see it in chronological order, because it makes the regular theatrical version even more better. It makes a lot of the performances more better. The chronological version is just like, okay, this is kind of random, whatever. But no, but coming back to this movie, the structural gamble is something, like I say, if you're not expecting, we're getting, okay, this part of the movie is following Luke, this part of the movie is following Avery, this part of the movie is following Jason and AJ. And basically you just have to go along for the ride. And like, if you're not really prepared for that, then you're probably not going to enjoy the movie as much. And there is one thing too, when it comes to this movie, patience is necessary. Because like I say, the movie doesn't hold your hand. Like I say, it's telling a story, but you have to really be paying attention to it. So it's not a movie that you can watch where you're looking down at your phone for a lot of it. Because if you're looking down at your phone and for the first time watching it, you're going to be confused watching this movie. And then too, like there are a few scenes in the movie that are kind of rough to watch from an emotional standpoint. Like Ramona goes through it in this movie from an emotional standpoint. Luke, basically for the first time you seeing him with his mask off, essentially when he's having that conversation with her on the phone about, hey, don't ever tell him about me. Like for the first time you seeing him this as vulnerable as you was going to see him in the movie, and those were his final moments of life. And then of course that image of him after he fell out the window, because he broke his legs too. If you really look at it, he broke his legs and they kind of bent in this weird way, and his eyes are wide open as Avery's looking down at him and he's just staring back at him. And I think that I always felt like that image kind of haunted Avery, for those 15 years, that like that image of Luke just blood pooling out of him on the ground, legs broken, and him just staring. I feel like that has haunted Avery for 15 years basically. So like I said, there are a few things in the movie that really hit you and kind of stick with you in that regard. Why I feel like this movie belongs with the loners, drifters, and outsiders, I mean, because like I said earlier in the episode, it checks all those boxes. And plus too, this was a movie that I've been wanting to do for some time and talk about a little bit and everything, so I felt like it was perfect to do it for this month. And how, I mean, I look back at it and then, cause like I said, I watched the movie with two mindsets. I watched it thinking back to how when I first saw it in back when it came out in 2013, and everything. When I watched that at the movie theater, like how it touched me then watching it recently, how it still touches me, but it touches me more as a grown man. Like I said, a near 40-year-old opposed to someone that was in their mid 20s when I first saw it, and everything, and how it kind of connects to Taxi Driver, because I mean the fact that you have these people that are loners, the drifters, the outsiders, they don't fit in necessarily, but they try to fit to some degree. Even Avery, he wants to fit in with the crooked cops, but his moral makeup would not allow him to do so. So he turns against them, and he's looked at as the bad guy, but it's like, no, really, y'all the bad guys for what y'all doing, and everything. Luke, who just happened to meet this chick, and I think he was in love with her because she did love him, and they had this child, and the child grows up, wanting to be loved also, to some degree. And AJ even wanting to be loved. And I feel like Travis Bickle, he wanted to be loved by Betsy, but he just didn't know how to act because he didn't know how to talk to women and everything. And, Iris, being this kid who is forced into this life of being a prostitute, which like I said, still filthy, with that whole thing. But, yeah, I mean, there are some similarities or, connectable things between this and, Taxi Driver from the standpoint of what my theme for this month is. And then also too, what the next movie will be, but I will save that for what the next movie will be for this month, when I talk about it, before I wrap up the show. So before I get up out of here, of course, I always ask you guys, the listeners, a few engagement questions, right? Just to see what y'all think about this stuff. So which storyline hit you the hardest? Is it the Luke, the Avery, or Jason and AJ? Which storyline hit you the hardest and why? Let me know, like I say, on YouTube, comment down below which one. You can hit me up on Threads at the J Giles. You can let me know or whatever. Also on Instagram, JMT Podcast and everything like that. You can let me know which storyline of the movie hit you the hardest. For me personally, I would probably say the Luke storyline hits me the hardest. But the AJ and Jason storyline also as well. Avery, not so much, because Avery's storyline felt like it could have just to a degree, it could have been like a cop movie to a degree, and I feel like I've seen certain aspects of that in other movies more so than anything. Um, Another question I have is, do you think Luke ever had a real chance? Like, do you think, like, okay, in a perfect world, do you think he had a real chance of getting with Ramona and them living a happy life, or would his self-destructive nature taking over eventually and he would have ruined all of that? So I'm asking you guys that question as well. I'm not going to answer that, but I would love to know what you guys think. And then again, I will ask this in a different way, but can cycles truly be broken or only softened? Like generational trauma, can it truly be broken? Can you break the cycle of just whatever bad thing that has probably tormented your family? Can it truly be broken, or can you just kind of soften it to a degree? I feel like in certain cases that you can break it, and then in certain cases it can be softened. I think it all depends on the severity of whatever that cycle is. So yeah, that's pretty much for this episode. I want to thank everybody for listening as always. Really would love to hear you guys' feedback about this episode, because I feel like The Place Beyond the Pines is a movie that I don't think gets talked about enough, especially when it has some really good performances in it, and everything. The next episode 365, I am continuing on with Ryan Gosling, actually, and I will be talking about Drive. That will be the next movie, because it definitely fits into the theme of this month, which of course, loners, drifters, and outsiders. And I feel like the driver, the kid, if you will, fits into he as one character checks off all those boxes. He's a loner, he's a drifter, and he is an outsider. So I am looking forward to talking about that movie as well. Again, thank you guys for listening to this episode. I'll be back next episode talking about Drive. Until next time, peace.